Hello, and welcome to CSA's webinar series, CSA Cloud Bytes. Today's webinar is sponsored by Securiti. In a few moments, I will pass it off to the Securiti team to introduce the topic and today's presenters. But a few housekeeping items before we start. Please keep in mind that slides from this webinar are not provided. However, the recording of this webinar will be available on demand minutes after the conclusion. Simply use the same link to view the webinar again or share it with a colleague. Now I pass it off to Nikhil to help introduce our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session on maximizing cloud data security using DSPM and unified data controls. I am Nikhil Girdhar, Senior Director of Product at Securiti. Really pleased to be joining this session. And alongside with me, I also have two amazing panelists, Mahmood Khan, who is the Global CISO and SVP at CNA. Mahmood has a wealth of experience in cybersecurity space, who has worked across multiple different industries. And Mahmood also volunteers for Chicago Electronic Crime Task Force. Joining Mahmood, we also have Rehan Jalil, who is the CEO of Securiti. Rehan has founded multiple cybersecurity companies, all of which have not only been successful, but also creators of new categories. Currently, Rehan is leading Securiti, which is the leader in data controls cloud. So thank you, both of you, for joining me. And as we dive into the discussion, maybe you want to say a quick hi to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for the great introduction, Nikhil. My name is Mahmood Khan. I'm very excited to be here today to speak on a topic that we as CISOs live and breathe daily. And so certainly really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone here today on this topic.
Thank you so much for hosting me here. It'll be a great topic, great audience. It's a great forum. CS is a great forum. So looking forward to the good discussion with my friend Mahmood.
Thank you both. So with this, let's jump in and start with the conversation on data as a macro, right? We almost think of in the current landscape where we're in this big bang era of data explosion, where organizations are collecting massive volume of data, and that provides many opportunities for innovation for them. At the same time, we also want to understand what are the different data obligations that organizations are facing today. So on this topic, I want to start maybe Mahmood, you can share a few thoughts and then we can move towards Rehan.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very interesting question. In my personal opinion, data is so fundamental into everything that we do today and what makes our business unique, right? If you think about it, many organizations have different elements of what's transpiring and what's taking their business to the next level. With us in this specific case where I sit in my current role with CNA specifically, the way I look at it is everything that we do in the insurance industry revolves around data. So most companies actually have a product that they sell. For example, if you take Walmart, they sell groceries. You take restaurants, they sell food, and what have you. But that all becomes element of that becomes very important from the perspective of actually protecting when we think about data. So for CNA, we consider data as our product since we sell insurance. And if you really think about it, what that means is that really means it's all aspect of insurance policy. If you think about insurance policy, when you go out and you purchase let's say for an insurance policy for your car, everything that's built in that policy is based on data. So it's data about you, it's data about, whether you put your company information there, it's data about your family. If you're getting insurance on medical, it's data about your medical history and so on and so forth. So data has become the most fundamental aspect in pretty much everything that we do today. And that's why it's become very important for us to be able to protect that data, not just from the aspect of business, but most importantly, for our consumers and our clients that are basically taking what we call our product. Now, from the perspective of when we think about what are the obligations, so obviously it depends on who you're asking. If you're going to ask me as a CISO, I'm always going to say, the perspective of being able to protect that data is very important. But similarly, if you ask, let's say, my legal and my compliance team, they're going to say, well, we want to be able to make sure that it's meeting, for example, data retention policies. And the fact that we can destruct data in an organization is just as equally important with certain deadlines. If you ask our chief data privacy officer, they'll want to make sure that data meets the obligations as it relates to various regulation, GDPR, CCPA, UK data protection, you name it, depending on where your company is operating. So everybody has a different element of what makes it important from an obligation perspective. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to being able to protect that data and ensuring that not only you're keeping your business secure, but you're keeping actually your consumers who've trusted you with that data secured as well.
Thanks, Mahmood. And certainly, like as you mentioned, data is such a core component asset for the organization. I read somewhere like, what's the ROI of protecting your data? It's really the cost of being a digital company. So it's kind of the DNA for most organizations today. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. And Rehan, anything you want to add on the obligation side?
I think Mahmood covered it really well. Amazing opportunities that data brings. Equivalently, there are obligations, as Mahmood was highlighting. You have to protect it. You can't lose it. Your reputation, your business at stake. You have to use it responsibly. All the privacy regulations and all other regulations, and frankly, consumer sentiment ties to it. And then internal governance, access controls, all that has to be accounted for. That's your governance obligations, and compliance goes beyond privacy. So generally, you have multiple type of controls. Security is no question is the heart of it, but all the other things, they need to be accounted for. It's on the same data that you have to fulfill those obligations.
Makes absolute sense. So talking about security, right? Moving into kind of one of the core topics of the day, DSPM, which is a very hot topic today, kind of a fascinating term for many in the cybersecurity world today. And it's a term that means data security posture management, coined by Gartner, essentially focused on protecting data in the cloud. And I imagine many in the audience are trying to learn what is DSPM since it's new. So maybe, Rehan, we can start from you, where you can shed some light on what are the core issues that people are trying to solve with DSPM solutions?
I think key thing is to actually, first of all, even understand, what data systems exist in your environment at any given time in all environments, not just production, but QA and test in every other environment, and native, non-native systems. You actually have to understand. Have an overall inventory of your systems, but then go deeper, understand what kind of sensitive information exists, on the system. Are the systems configured properly? Is the underlying infrastructure, configured that way? But then also looking from access side of things. Who's entitled to this data? Are there overprivileges, or the privileges shouldn't be existing, or access patterns are actually on this data? And then from the lens of all your other policies around data that actually have to be accounted for. Essentially, when you're looking at your data in the cloud or cloud systems, you want to actually have always clarity on what data systems exist, where they are, and what issues may exist around it. And it's easier said than done, because these environments are always changing. And DSPM certainly covers, by definition, it covers the cloud systems. But in an organization, naturally, there'll be other systems which are not necessarily in the public cloud. You can go to any large enterprise, you're going to see that. So bringing consistency, using the same policies, same grammar, which you're applying to understand in the cloud, it has to be everywhere. Otherwise, you'll have different grammar and different policies everywhere. So going for public cloud, private cloud, SaaS cloud, data cloud, can you actually have all in one place? Going from data security posture management, which is cloud oriented, everywhere else, I think is where we have learned from customers like CNA and all, that you need consistency across everywhere.
Makes sense, Rehan. And so, Rehan, I have a follow-up, but I'll come back to you in a second. But Mahmood, listening to Rehan, and while you're sitting as a CISO, right, is that how you look at DSPM? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I think Rehan's hit it spot on. I mean, when you think about DSPM, you really start to think about things around the practical approach that you need to secure ultimately your data. And then I agree with Rehan that this has become more than just a cloud. But the idea there is just you want to make sure you can ensure your sensitive and your regular data is always as the correct data security posture, quote unquote. And it doesn't matter where it's stored or it's moved, right? So to really accomplish this, in my personal opinion, you got to be able to discover where all your data is sitting. You got to be able to classify that, be able to apply some sort of sensitivity level on it, be able to detect and alert as data, moves towards a potential policy violation, and then ultimately be able to take action on it. Now, to me, I think that all becomes the fundamental element of what you want to build out in a good data security posture management methodology. And I really do think that those critical fundamental aspects that Rehan touched on is all it's very important to bake that in.
Nikhil, I'll just add to what Mahmood just said. It was DSPM is a great place to actually have those things and then be covered. What we've done for many of our larger customers is that they're thinking of this as a more like a data command center. Can they actually have a data command center? They can go to, just like they have a SOC and a NOC, they can have full view around the data wherever it is, and the ability to perform actions, whether it's from configuration lens, from access lens, from other risks that exist to actually cover that. That's what we're learning from some of the largest customers.
Yeah. And if I can just add one more piece to it, because sometimes you go back, you take a step back and you say, well, why do I really need DSPM, right? But why do I really need to have it in? And I really do think that oftentimes it's not, I can speak to it from a CISO perspective, but reality is, you're actually trying to solve a business problem here. As organizations are moving very fast to a technology evolution, you're seeing a lot more advancement in terms of data is being utilized. And so innovation is becoming critical, which is why many organizations are embracing the cloud and moving towards a cloud transformation journey to get that flexibility and the scalability in there. So really, at the end of the day, the biggest aspect that we're trying to solve for is that as organizations move more and more towards that cloud transformation, that data transformation journey, and start to become more flexible and scalable, you want to make sure that that data, as Rehan, you call it out, there's a command center to be able to identify where all of that data is, and be ultimately leading to the element of how do you protect it, how do you classify it, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a really good point that you made there, Rehan. It's just solving that bigger problem that organization is really trying to focus on around the growth of their business.
Absolutely, and I think you both nailed it. It's security across the entire journey of data, right? From its origin to being able to understand how it moves in the organization, but then following and understanding all the risk associated, whether it's config, access, and then being able to fix those. I want to follow up on an interesting point, Rehan, that you raised is like you almost talked about data and unification, right? Having consistent policies across data everywhere, not just in cloud for DSPM, but I think you have data everywhere in your mind. So what's a good way to unify these controls around data in a different location? Because it's a very hard problem. Perhaps you can share your experience on that.
Yeah, think of an organization. Obligations are at the organization level. Of course, we can talk about specific topics, which is great because we have to go into details. But from organization level, think of it can easily become very siloed. Or I have a cloud security oriented stuff, a data security posture manager, or like anything in the public cloud. Then I have, if there's a different silo that you want to create, that's a data cloud or SaaS cloud or private cloud. You need to figure out a way that you can actually have one way to look at it, one way to actually understand and apply policies. The other is often very easy to, say, oh, I only do just the, security of these systems. But very quickly it turns out that you have to understand access governance on it. You have to understand on the data itself. You have to understand any regulatory issues on the data, cross-border data sovereignty, privacy regulations, which needs to be accounted for. So, but at the heart of it is, if you understand your data in depth across these environments, when I say depth, what I mean by that, this is not classic discovery. In a classic discovery, it was okay to find just a sense of information, and maybe always, if you have a certain level of efficacy, you live by it. As soon as new regulations like GDPR and CPRA and LGPD others come along, the context is important. What is meant by that? You have to understand whose data it is, which regulatory laws apply, and without knowing whose data, it means end consumer. Is it a German resident? Is it New York or California or a Brazilian resident? Because different laws will apply. So you have to go deeper, understand the context of it, to understand whose data it is, extract residency. And from there on, you will see that you have a bunch of obligations you can actually meet from the lens of their sovereignty and breach impact and understanding and subject rights, and all these things are going to be extracted out of it, right? But if you can establish that in-depth understanding of the data, the sensitive data intelligence as a graph, then you can apply all kinds of control in a much more non-siloed way, because your source of truth is the same. That's I would say is actually really needed.
That makes a lot of sense. And Rehan, in a way, like you anticipated my kind of follow-up question, which is about looking at data as a whole, data in all the locations, but also gaining different insights around that data. And I think, Mahmood, you also touched on that topic earlier. Like it's all about visibility and understanding of that data, right? As they say, if you have to understand what data it is, you can't protect what you can't see. So anything that you want to add, Mahmood, to Rehan's perspective in terms of like what kind of insights do you need about data in order to protect it?
Yeah, it's a great question. With so much massive amount of data that is exchanged daily for organizations like us, knowing what that data is, where it exists, where it lives, who can access it, how it's ultimately sent, are all critical to the fundamental element of protecting that data. So ensuring that we can identify what I quote unquote call our crown jewels and where they sit, whether it's structured or unstructured, whether it's on the cloud or multiple cloud, or in some cases on-prem, and being able to appropriately categorize them, and then getting into the depth of understanding what that data looks like is very, very important. Because really, to me, I think driving that true data visibility is the element of how you're going to ultimately get to the next step of protecting that data. And so that means you're going to be looking at defining policies and procedures in the overall program, but more importantly, assessing the technologies where that data sits, and then trying to do this all automatically in a very efficient manner. It's also just as critical for us as security professionals. So really, I think it really goes back to the heart of what Rehan was saying, is that the deeper understanding that you can have on the data, the easier it is to then make a determination what kind of protections are you going to put in place, because not all protections are equal. You may choose to do different type of protection, but unless you have that visibility and depth of understanding, as a security professional, it is very hard to then make a determination if you don't get that visibility to determine what type of protection you want to put in. And far too often I've seen security organizations will take a conservative approach and say, okay, let's just do it all this way. Let's just encrypt it all. And soon you find out that, oh, well, not only is it challenging to encrypt large, massive amount of data, but you also start to realize it takes a very, very long time, and you can't meet those goals that you were looking for. So data depth, data visibility is probably the starting point in order to get to that next step of how you're actually going to be securing the data itself.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and a great point. Like, it's not just being able to find data, but it's also being able to understand the context, whether it's the security context, privacy context, but also the business context. Why is certain data important to different teams? And then you decide your controls appropriately. So moving on to sort of controls itself, right? We talked about understanding the data and then figuring out, okay, different kinds of security controls that should be implemented. One of those key controls is being able to prevent misconfigurations and being able to like improve the posture as a whole. And one general piece of feedback that I get from customers as we're talking to them is like they're being flooded with different misconfigurations alert, especially when they're using CSPM tools. So they're asking me like, okay, show me what misconfiguration issues around data that I need to fix first, right? So I want to start, Mahmood, from you, and maybe you can share your CISO perspective is when we're thinking about addressing misconfiguration risks around data systems, what's a good remediation strategy to convert some of those alerts into action?
Yeah, I think for first element of this is really building out a good process and in place, procedure in place to be able to prioritize your alerts based on the different data sensitivity. It's very similar to the concept of what we look at the basic SOC and the idea behind using a SIM to be able to look at all the events that are coming into your technology for security technology for actual monitoring. And so, we consume a lot of data that comes from all of these different sources, from logs, from whether it's firewalls, whether it's applications, whether it's operating systems, whether it's IoT technology. But as you consume that log, you start to then build out your playbooks on how you're going to prioritize the different type of alerts for your SOC to be able to take different type of responses. So understanding that data sensitivity is, in my opinion, when you translate that into data, the understanding that data sensitivity is the beginning part of this. As you start to understand that, being able to understand who owns what data is just as equally important, because that is where I think causes a lot of problems for security organizations. You can find a lot of good aspects. You deploy out different tools to be able to pick up different data, but that data ownership, that data stewardship is where the challenge starts to come into play. And so being able to then really defining those processes in the front, that as you identify these things, who actually owns that data, who makes the right calls, who can make decisions on it, is just as important. So when you get the alert, it makes it easier to be able to go back and say, okay, this is how I'm going to address, because this is the owner of that particular data set. And I think just like any security program, educational awareness is big in this whole thing. I think this is definitely a lesson learned for us too, that as we get into deploying any tools out, it's important to be able to get that buy-in from what I call the owners of the data, because at the end of the security doesn't own it. That data is actually owned by the business, and the business have to make certain decisions on how they want to ensure classification level exists and what they actually want to do when you get certain alerts types. So being able to constantly educate the business about this is what it does, this is what the product does, this is what we're going to be getting, and then these are some options that you can take in order to help us determine what actions take. I think it's just very, very important. But those are some of the things that I've been looking into when it comes to really dealing with some of those challenges.